The rain had been pouring since dawn, washing the dirt streets outside the small-town orphanage. Isabela sat by the cracked window, hugging her knees, watching raindrops chase each other down the glass. She had no memory of her parents, only the worn birth certificate that the head of the orphanage kept locked in a drawer. Life inside the orphanage was cold and structured, ruled by rules that seemed more like chains than guidance. The matron was strict and often harsh, especially to children who dared to dream beyond the walls. From the earliest days, Isabela learned that survival meant blending in. Speaking too loudly or asking too many questions would only earn her extra chores. She swept the dusty corridors, washed piles of laundry in water that stung her skin, and ate the same thin soup day after day. Yet even in the monotony, a quiet determination burned inside her. She was different from the others, not because she was better, but because she refused to believe. This was all life had to offer. School was her only escape. The orphanage allowed the children to attend the local public school, but Mo saw it as a chore. Isabela saw it as a door. She sat in the front row, absorbing every word from the teachers, scribbling notes until her fingers ached. Books became her friends, her refuge. Whenever she read about the human body in the old biology textbooks, something inside her sparked. She would imagine herself in a white coat, helping people, saving lives. It was a dream so far beyond her current reality that it almost felt dangerous to hold on to. The other children often mocked her for studying too much. They would whisper that she was wasting her time, that orphans never became anything more than laborers or maids. Isabela never replied. She had learned that words were cheap, but effort was expensive, and she was willing to pay that price. Even when her hands were raw from cleaning, or her body ached from carrying water buckets, she would stay up late at night, reading under the faint glow of a stolen flashlight. The matron noticed her persistence and did not like it. One evening, after finding Isabela awake past lights out, she snatched the book from her hands and tossed it across the room. Her voice was cold as she warned Isabela that dreams were dangerous for someone like her. "You will only end up disappointed," she said with a sneer. But those words did not crush Isabela. They hardened her resolve. When the annual health checkup came to the orphanage, a young doctor visited with a kind smile and gentle voice. Isabela watched him examine the children, listening intently as he explained things about nutrition and hygiene. It was the first time she saw someone who matched the image in her mind. Afterward, she lingered by the door and asked him about his work. He told her it was hard but worth it, and that helping people was the most rewarding feeling in the world. That night, she lay awake not because of the matron's warnings, but because the dream now felt alive, breathing in her chest. The next morning, she made herself a silent promise. No matter how long it took, or how hard it became, she would find a way out of the orphanage, study medicine, and become a doctor. Not to prove the matron wrong, not even to silence the children who laughed at her, but because she could see no other path worth walking. Months turned into years, and Isabela's determination only grew sharper. At school, she was known as the quiet girl, who always had the highest scores. Teachers noticed her potential, and some offered her extra exercises to challenge her mind. She accepted every task with gratitude, though she rarely spoke of her dreams. She kept them tucked safely in her heart, away from the mocking laughter of her peers at the orphanage. Life inside the orphanage remained hard. The building was old and in constant need of repair. Winters were especially cruel, with icy winds seeping through the broken windows and thin blankets. Many nights Isabela would fall asleep shivering, yet her mind stayed awake, wandering through the pages of borrowed library books. Each fact she learned about the human body became another brick in the foundation of her future. At 15, she was given her first opportunity to earn a small income by cleaning the library. After school, the pay was meager, but the access to books was priceless. She would finish her duties quickly, then sit at the far table, reading medical encyclopedias and taking notes on scraps of paper she carried in her pockets. The librarian, a gentle woman named Mrs. Carter, saw her dedication and began setting aside books she thought might help Isabela's studies. One day while shelving books, Isabela overheard a group of older students talking about scholarships for university. The idea lit a fire in her chest. She began researching every scholarship she could find, writing down requirements, deadlines, and application processes. It seemed impossible for a girl with no family and no money. But impossibility had never stopped her before. Back at the orphanage, the matron remained a shadow over her life, always suspicious of her late nights and extra study hours. When Isabela once asked permission to attend a science fair in the city, the matron refused, saying she had chores to finish. The disappointment was heavy, but she found another way. She convinced Mrs. Carter to let her take the day off work at the library and use the small pay she had saved to buy a bus ticket. The science fair was a revelation. She wandered from booth to booth, asking questions, taking notes, and filling her mind with possibilities. She watched medical students present their projects and for the first time felt she was not an outsider, but someone who belonged in that world. The city itself, with its tall buildings and endless movement, seemed to whisper to her that life could be bigger than the walls she had known. When she returned to the orphanage that evening, the matron scolded her and gave her extra chores as punishment. But the anger and exhaustion could not erase the images in her mind. That day had given her a vision of the life she wanted, and no punishment could take it away. She continued her studies with renewed focus, waking before dawn to review her notes, before school, and staying late at the library whenever possible. She knew the road ahead was long, but every page she turned, every problem she solved, was another step closer to walking it. The final years of high school arrived faster than Isabela expected. Her classmates began talking about their plans after graduation, most with the comfort of knowing their families could support them. For Isabela, there was no safety net. The orphanage would release her once she turned 18, and from that day forward, she would be entirely on her own. The thought was terrifying, but it also pushed her to work harder. She applied for every scholarship she could find, spending hours in the library, filling out forms, and writing essays about her ambitions. Some applications required recommendation letters, and her teachers were more than willing to provide them. They admired her resilience, though many of them quietly wondered how she would survive the financial burden of medical school. When her final exams came, Isabela barely slept. She studied until her eyes ached, reciting terms and concepts under her breath as she walked to school. On the last day of testing, she felt both relief and dread. Relief that the hardest academic hurdle of her young life was over, and dread because now she had to wait for results that would determine her future. A month later, the letter arrived at the library where she was working. Her hands trembled as she opened it. She had been accepted into one of the top universities in the city, with a partial scholarship. It was not enough to cover everything, but it was a start. For most people, it would be a small victory. For her, it was a crack in the walls that had trapped her for so long. The day she left the orphanage was strangely quiet. She packed her few belongings into a second-hand suitcase and walked out without looking back. There were no farewells from the other children, no blessing from the matron. It did not matter. She was free, and that freedom was worth more than any goodbye. Life in the city was both exhilarating and brutal. The university campus was a world of opportunity, but rent, food, and books drained her limited savings quickly. She found a job cleaning at a small cafe near campus, working early mornings before lectures and late nights after study sessions. The exhaustion was constant, but she refused to let it break her. Her classmates often invited her to social gatherings, but she declined. Every spare hour was dedicated to studying or working. She had no time for distractions, no time to forget why she was there. While others saw her as a quiet and perhaps distant student, inside, she was fighting a daily battle to keep her dream alive. One evening after a long shift at the cafe, she sat at her desk under the dim light of a cheap lamp, reviewing her anatomy notes. The room was small and cold, but to her it felt like the first space that was truly her own. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to smile without fear of it being taken away. She was no longer the orphan girl who had to hide her dreams. She was Isabela, a medical student, and she had taken her first real step toward the life she had always wanted. The first year of medical school tested Isabela in ways she had never imagined. The workload was relentless, the competition fierce, and the pace unyielding. Students with wealthy families could afford private tutors and the latest textbooks, while she relied on borrowed materials from the library and secondhand copies she bought with the tips from her cafe job. Every day felt like a race she was running uphill, yet she refused to slow down. Some professors noticed her dedication and were impressed by how she balanced her studies with long work hours. One professor, Dr. Harris, often stayed after class to answer her questions. He never treated her as less capable because of her background. His belief in her abilities gave her strength on the days she felt overwhelmed. Financially, life was fragile. There were weeks when she could only afford instant noodles, and days when she walked across the city rather than spend money on bus fare. The exhaustion sometimes left her body trembling, but her mind remained sharp. She reminded herself constantly that this was temporary, that every sleepless night and skipped meal was part of the price she was willing to pay. During her second semester, she applied for a competitive research internship at the city hospital. It was meant for top-performing students, and many doubted she would be chosen. But she poured herself into the application, highlighting her academic performance and her relentless work ethic. Weeks later, she was accepted. The internship did not pay much, but it gave her access to hospital wards, real patients, and hands-on learning that went far beyond textbooks. The hospital was a place of both wonder and heartbreak. She saw lives saved and lives lost. Sometimes within the same hour, she learned how fragile the human body could be, but also how powerful compassion was in the face of suffering. Standing beside experienced doctors, she realized she was no longer chasing an abstract dream. She was already stepping into the life she had envisioned as a child. Outside of school and the hospital, her cafe job continued. Her days often began before sunrise and ended long past midnight. The people around her marveled at her endurance. But Isabela knew it was not just endurance. It was survival. There was no one else to fall back on, no family to catch her if she stumbled. By the end of her first year, she was not just surviving, she was thriving. Her grades placed her among the top students in her class, and her reputation as a hard worker spread among both faculty and classmates. Still, she kept her story to herself. Few knew she had grown up in an orphanage, and she preferred it that way. She wanted to be judged by her abilities, not by the pity of others. Yet deep inside, a part of her carried a quiet fire. She remembered every face that had told her she could not succeed, every voice that had mocked her dreams. She was not ready to confront them yet, but the day would come when her success would speak louder than any insult they had ever thrown. The second year of medical school began with heavier demands and greater expectations. Isabela had proven herself, but now the challenges grew sharper. More clinical rotations, more exams, and more responsibility at the hospital left her with little room to breathe. She no longer just memorized facts. She was expected to think like a doctor, to make decisions quickly, and to understand the weight those decisions carried. Her financial situation remained difficult. She picked up extra shifts at the cafe whenever she could, often working until her legs ached. On some nights, she would collapse into her small bed and wake only when the alarm reminded her it was time to start again. But the dream still pulled her forward, stronger than the fatigue that threatened to slow her down. It was during this year that she crossed paths again with people from her past. One rainy afternoon, while leaving the hospital, she ran into a group of former classmates from her orphanage days. They had been some of the loudest voices mocking her when she was younger. Now they stood in front of her, wearing expensive clothes, laughing about their easy jobs in family businesses. At first they did not recognize her. She had changed. Her posture was confident, her expression calm. When one of them finally realized who she was, surprise flashed in their eyes. They asked how she had ended up here, as if the hospital badge around her neck was a costume, rather than proof of her place. She simply told them she was a medical student and had work to return to. Without waiting for their reaction, she walked away, leaving them standing in the rain. The encounter stayed with her for days, not because their opinions mattered, but because it reminded her of the journey she had taken. The girl they had once laughed at was now walking a path they had never imagined for her. It was not yet the time for revenge, but she knew that one day they would see her success and understand exactly what they had underestimated. At the hospital, she continued to impress her mentors. Dr. Harris recommended her for a specialized surgical observation program, something usually reserved for students in their final years. It meant longer hours, more technical knowledge, and exposure to high-stakes situations. She accepted without hesitation, knowing it would sharpen her skills even further. Some nights, she found herself standing in the quiet corridors of the hospital, looking out at the city lights. She thought about how far she had come from the cold orphanage windows, where she once dreamed of this life. Every hardship, every sacrifice had carried her here, and she was not done yet. By her third year in medical school, Isabela had built a reputation as one of the most disciplined and reliable students in the program. Her professors spoke highly of her to visiting physicians, and her peers often came to her for help with difficult concepts. She carried herself with quiet confidence, never flaunting her achievements, but never hiding them either. The surgical observation program had given her access to procedures most students her age only read about. She watched skilled surgeons operate with precision, taking mental notes on every step. In between her studies and work at the cafe, she volunteered for extra hours in the emergency department, where the pace was fast and the stakes were high. The pressure did not scare her. It reminded her why she was here. One afternoon, the hospital hosted a charity event for underprivileged youth. Isabela volunteered to assist, never expecting that the event would bring pieces of her passed directly in front of her. A group of children from the orphanage she had once called home arrived, accompanied by the same matron who had once told her dreams were dangerous. The matron looked older, her once sharp posture bent slightly, but her eyes still carried the same calculating gaze. At first, the matron did not recognize her. Isabela wore her white coat, her hair tied neatly, a stethoscope resting around her neck. When their eyes met, recognition sparked, followed by something else, discomfort. The matron asked, in a strained voice, if she truly was studying to be a doctor. Isabela confirmed it with a calm smile and turned her attention back to the children, checking their vitals and explaining simple health tips in a way they could understand. Throughout the afternoon, the matron lingered nearby, watching silently as Isabela interacted with the children. There was no apology offered, no acknowledgement of the years of doubt and restriction. But Isabela did not need it. The look in the matron's eyes was enough. It was the first crack in the wall of dismissal that had once surrounded her. After the event, one of the younger girls from the orphanage whispered to Isabela that she wanted to be a nurse one day. Isabela knelt beside her, telling her to study hard and never let anyone convince her the dream was too big. The girl's eyes lit up in a way Isabela recognized from her own reflection years ago. Walking home that evening, she felt something shift inside her. The revenge she had once imagined was no longer about words or confrontation. It was about becoming so undeniably successful that no one who had doubted her could ignore it. And now, she was closer to that point than ever before. The final years of medical school were a relentless test of endurance. Isabela's days blurred together, a cycle of hospital rounds, intense study sessions, and late-night shifts at the cafe. But the closer she came to graduation, the more she felt the weight of her efforts paying off. Her supervisors trusted her with complex tasks. Her peers respected her insights, and her name began to circulate among doctors as a student with rare dedication. During a large medical conference hosted in the city, Isabela was chosen to present her research on early detection, methods for a rare disease. It was the kind of opportunity that could open doors for future residencies. Standing on the stage before an audience of seasoned physicians, she spoke with clarity and authority. When she finished, the applause was not polite. It was genuine, filled with recognition. After the presentation, she was approached by a group of doctors, offering advice, encouragement, and even potential job prospects. After her graduation, among the attendees, she spotted two more familiar faces from her past, former classmates from her old school days, the same ones who had dismissed her ambitions as childish fantasy. This time, their expressions were not mocking. They were stunned. They tried to start a conversation, asking how she had managed to get here. She answered briefly, then excused herself to join a discussion with respected surgeons from abroad. She did not need to explain her journey to them. Her presence on that stage had already done the talking. Back at the hospital, her clinical rotations became even more intense. She was assigned to work under Dr. Patel, a demanding but brilliant physician, known for shaping some of the best young doctors in the city. The expectations were high, but Isabela thrived under the pressure. Every successful diagnosis, every patient she helped stabilize, felt like a step closer to proving that she truly belonged in this world. One night, after assisting in a particularly difficult case, she left the hospital exhausted, but fulfilled. The city lights shimmered against the dark sky, and she realized that the orphanage walls that once confined her were nothing but a distant memory now. She had built a life far beyond them, brick by brick. Through sacrifice and persistence, she was no longer simply chasing a dream. She was living it, and those who had once doubted her were being forced to watch from the outside, unable to deny the reality she had created. Graduation approached with a mix of anticipation and relentless pressure. The final exams were grueling, the kind that pushed even the strongest students to their limits. Isabela spent long nights in the library and even longer days at the hospital, determined to finish at the top of her class. Her dedication was unshakable, and the thought of walking across the stage in her white coat kept her moving through the fatigue. A week before the ceremony, the hospital hosted an open community health day, inviting residents from across the city for free checkups. Among the steady flow of patients, Isabela saw a face she had not expected. The matron from the orphanage, accompanied by several staff members. The matron looked smaller now, her voice less commanding, as she explained she had come for a routine check. Isabela conducted the examination with professional detachment, asking questions, recording answers, and giving clear advice. The matron watched her with an expression caught between pride and disbelief, as though still trying to reconcile the girl, who once scrubbed floors under her orders with the poised medical graduate standing before her. There were no apologies spoken, but Isabela did not need them. This moment was the apology. The event drew coverage from a local news outlet, and Isabela was interviewed about her journey from a child in the city's orphanage to a graduating doctor. The story spread quickly, appearing on social media and in newspapers. Former classmates, neighbors from the old town, and even distant figures from her past reached out with messages of admiration. The same voices that once told her to be realistic were now calling her an inspiration. When the graduation day arrived, the auditorium was filled with family members, friends, and faculty. Isabela stood alone in the family seating section, but she did not feel lonely. She had carried herself through every trial to this moment. As her name was called, and she stepped onto the stage to receive her diploma, the applause felt different. It was not just for a graduate, but for a survivor, a fighter, someone who had defied every limitation placed upon her. After the ceremony, she stepped outside into the bright sunlight. Holding her diploma tightly, she saw a group of reporters waiting, and behind them, a few of the people who had once doubted her. Their eyes followed her as she spoke to the cameras, her voice steady as she shared her hope for children like her to never give up. This was not a boast, it was a statement of victory. After graduation, Isabela secured a residency at the same city hospital where she had trained as a student. The position was demanding, but it placed her directly in the environment she had always dreamed of. Each day she faced new challenges, emergency cases, long surgeries, and difficult diagnoses. But every moment was proof that she had earned her place. Her story continued to circulate in the media, and invitations for public speaking began to arrive. Schools, community centers, and youth programs wanted her to share her journey. She accepted these invitations when her schedule allowed, knowing that each word she spoke might plant a seed in the mind of a young listener. One of these invitations brought her back to her old school. Walking through the gates felt surreal. The hallways looked smaller, the walls duller than she remembered, yet the memories were vivid. She was introduced to the students as a former pupil who had gone on to become a doctor. The teachers looked at her with pride, but among them, she recognized a few who had once dismissed her ambition. Their polite smiles could not hide the awkwardness in their eyes. During her talk, she spoke about resilience, discipline, and the importance of refusing to let circumstances define a future. She never mentioned names or specific incidents from her childhood, but her words carried weight. The students listened in silence, and when she finished, the applause was long and loud. After the event, a small group of her former classmates approached. They stumbled over their words, offering congratulations and commenting on how far she had come. She listened politely, then excused herself, leaving them standing in the same schoolyard where they had once laughed at her. This time, the power was entirely hers. That evening, as she walked home through the city streets, she thought about the path ahead. Revenge no longer meant confronting those who had hurt her. It meant continuing to rise, building a life so strong and impactful that their past cruelty became irrelevant. The satisfaction came not from their regret, but from her undeniable success. Years passed, and Isabela's name became known far beyond the city. Her dedication, skill, and compassion made her one of the most respected doctors in her field. She led research projects, trained young medical students, and volunteered regularly in rural areas where healthcare was scarce. Every new accomplishment added another layer to the life she had built from nothing. She purchased a small but warm home near the hospital, its walls filled with books, certificates, and photographs from her travels to medical conferences. The house was quiet, but it was hers, a place she had earned without depending on anyone's approval. One morning, she received a letter from the orphanage. It was an invitation to attend their anniversary celebration as a guest of honor. For a moment, she considered ignoring it, but something in her heart told her to go. When she arrived, the building looked almost the same, though the paint was fading and the gardens were overgrown. Inside, the children were gathered in the main hall, their faces curious and eager. The current staff introduced her, and she stepped onto the small stage. She spoke to the children about possibility, about the strength they already carried inside them, and about how every difficult day could become a stepping stone towards something greater. She saw in their eyes the same spark she had once carried. Among the attendees were several people from her past: the matron, now retired and frail, and a few staff members who had once doubted her. They listened quietly, some with softened expressions, others with eyes lowered. Isabela felt no anger toward them anymore. Time and achievement had erased the need for it. She had already won in every way that mattered. After the event, she walked through the orphanage courtyard one last time. The air smelled of rain, and the sound of the children's laughter followed her. She realized that her life's revenge was not in proving others wrong. It was in proving herself right. As she returned to the hospital that evening, the city skyline stretched before her, glowing in the twilight. She knew her journey was far from over. There were still lives to save, young minds to inspire, and dreams to chase. But now, she walked forward not as the girl from the orphanage, but as Dr. Isabela, a woman who had fought every obstacle and turned it into the foundation for a life of purpose.